You're listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson from Protean Machining, and this week I am happy to welcome Mickey Jacobs. Welcome, Mickey.
Hey Dylan, what's going on?
Not too much. So, for those who don't follow you on Instagram, where can they find you? Who are you? What do you do? All that big picture stuff.
All right, I'm Mickey Michael Jacobs. I work at J&J Machining in Elk River, Minnesota. I am Mickey Six Gear on Instagram. I'm Michael Jacobs on LinkedIn. You can also find our work account, J&J Machining, on Instagram, and likewise J&J Machining on LinkedIn. We have a website too. I want to say it's kind of up to date. We're growing really fast, so it might not always have the latest and greatest equipment, but it's another good way to get a hold of us.
All right. Well, then, how did you get to work at J&J? I mean, from what I've heard, you actually have quite the backstory of quite some big name shops and stuff. So, let's get into it. How did you get into manufacturing?
Okay. If we want to start at the beginning, it was a steamy winter evening in Nashua, New Hampshire, and my parents were holding each other in a loving embrace. No, born in New Hampshire, grew up in the Bay Area, actually in San Jose. Kind of got the manufacturing bug when a kid moved in next door that did all the cool stuff. My dad was in semiconductor sales. I lived a pretty mundane childhood. Nothing too crazy or exciting. No dirt bikes, none of that. He was always on the road. And this kid moved in next to me, and it was polar opposite, right? They were dirt bikes, and his dad knew how to weld and do all this cool stuff. And when I got introduced to that young man, Tony, my good buddy Tony Ruiz, um, he's like in BattleBots was really cool back then. This is
Uh
like
huh.
late '90s, early 2000s, I want to say, and he decided that we were going to build a BattleBot. And so we started getting everything we need to build it. His dad taught us how to first oxyacetylene braze, and then we got into some oxyacetylene welding. We made up the chassis, and you know it was a simple wedge design with a flipper on it. And
Mm-hmm.
ever since working on that project, I'm like, dude, this stuff is so cool. This is something that I want to do. And he ended up being a great friend to have because his dad introduced us to some people that were also in manufacturing. Back when GoPeds were all the rage, there was a little company in the Bay called Santa Cruz Scooter Works, and they made a competing product called the Boxer. And this was Tony's dad, his good friend, owned a company called Pipeline Manufacturing that made these boxers. And I remember going down to his shop there, and at the time, I didn't really realize what I was looking at. It just seemed cool then. It was a bunch of Bridgeport mills and some, hydraulic tube bending machines, and he was doing everything from making parts for exercise equipment to Harley aftermarket stuff, and then these cool GoPed scooters. And I just remember thinking to myself, man, I want to do that someday. That's wicked cool. Well, we'll fast forward 10 years. We ended up in Phoenix, Arizona, after Dad took a move to go work for a smaller semiconductor manufacturer down there, On Semiconductor. You might have seen they have a big fab right off of McDowell and right next to the Papagos. It's right across from the Army base.
I'm sure I've seen it. Yeah,
Um,
driving around up there.
and so we moved down to Phoenix, and I kind of lost track of that. But I get through high school, decide I want to get into the military. So right after high school, I joined the Marine Corps, and um, kind of circled back around. I found myself back home in Phoenix after deployment, trying to figure out where I was going in life next. My dad at the time had gotten out of semiconductor. He was into construction. I was still pretty interested in manufacturing, but I didn't really have any marketable skills at the time. And I figured, well, you know what, I'll go to school. So I applied to ASU's engineering program, and quite promptly get rejected.
Oh
And
no.
I immediately realized that when everyone was telling me, hey, when I was in high school, Mickey, you need to get your shit together, they were being pretty serious. But it's pretty hard when you're 16, 17, 18 years old to see that far into the future. But while I got rejected from the Fullerton School of Engineering, I was accepted for the aerospace or aeronautical engineering program out at the Polytech campus. So I started taking some classes out there, and pretty quickly realized that that wasn't going to be a really great fit for what I was interested in. Um, the math I appreciated. I had a really good English teacher. I liked that, and I liked some of my science labs. But there was some other classes I was taking. Ironically, some of the engineering classes where I was like, this is just the worst. This is moving really really slow and not super interesting. So
I don't blame you. My first design class at the community college here, we started the first like 6 weeks in AutoCAD. And I was like, I'm never going to design a building. Like, I don't give a shit about this. Can we go to SolidWorks? Because that was the second semester. It was like straight from AutoCAD to Inventor and SolidWorks. And I was like, that's what I care about. Like, I want to learn this stuff. So let's get going.
yeah, I wanted to jump in. I wanted to understand, why airplanes worked. I mean, that sounds like a sort of a rhetorical question almost, but where they really start you out at is, okay, if I have a point load here and this is the span and this is, what are these for? Actually really important stuff, but not the super cool stuff that you want to see right away. So I kind of took a step back and said, okay, what the hell am I going to do? And I actually started applying for jobs and was fortunate enough to get a technician position at the Honeywell Space and Defense building up in Glendale. I didn't realize how big of a deal this was at the time, but it turned out to be pretty sweet. So I show up to the interview. I'm so sick I can barely walk. I had actually
Oh,
messed up
shit.
something in my inner ear, and so I was having these like terrible fluctuations in my balance abilities and all this stuff. But I'm like, I need to get a job. This looks like the right thing. So my wife drives me to this job interview. I just about make it in the building. It's everything I can do to hold it together. And I interview with a couple of guys, and it's not really the position I thought it was. It was more kind of a building maintenance and mechanical position, and I really wanted to be doing something a little bit more technical, but they're a- excuse me, they're offering a really fair wage. They seem like great guys, so I took the position. Well, fast forward 6, 12 months, this place is freaking awesome. So this is the facility that did all the avionics for the entire space shuttle program, which
Oh,
was
wow.
super
How
cool.
cool.
And on top of that, every one of the employees that was there had been there for like 45 or 50 years. So it was all the employees that helped build all the avionics for the space shuttle. So just some wicked cool stories. When I was there, the building was 150,000 square foot. About 50% of that was lab space, but they had some cool aerial photos. The heyday, they had like 30 or 40 of those portable buildings spanning like a couple acres of desert around the building. They had 1,000 employees working there. It was just the neatest thing. And during my tenure, that was the primary facility for Honeywell where they built CMGs, control moment gyros, and RWAs, reaction wheel assemblies. For those people playing the home game, this is basically attitude control for spacecraft. Okay, so on most satellites, sun is super abundant, right? We can get plenty of energy from the sun. What we can't do is carry a bunch of fuel. So they use these giant spinning discs and they torque them or spin them certain directions, and that's how they orient spacecraft. So there's like 8 of these things in the Hubble telescope. And as a matter of fact, when the Hubble had its CMGs replaced back in the late 90s, one of the CMGs is right there in the front lobby. Um, just wicked, wicked cool place to work. And they had a model shop. And to me, I didn't know what the hell a model shop was until I got introduced to these guys. But in corporate speak, a model shop is how you hide a machine shop in a building like this without getting too many accountants or bookkeepers wondering where all the money is going into some strange department.
Yeah, we're making models. That's all. That's all
Yep,
it is.
that's exactly what it was. So here's this little machine shop tucked away in the middle of this mostly white collar building, and a couple of late model Haas machines, some older Miltronic stuff, Hardage Chuckers, and these were your typical old school machinists, but the guys that had actually adapted over the past 45 years. So while they were wicked competent on a hardest chucker, and when I say wicked competent, I mean these guys holding a tenths or even less on some of these little tiny components they were making,
Jeez.
and adapted with the times. They all knew CAD CAM. They were using NX and Mastercam. They were programming on the ST25 they had, as well as they had a VF2 and a VF3, I believe. Um, and so I immediately fell in love. My goal was every morning show up to work, get everything I had to get done as quickly as I could, and then spend the rest of the day in the model shop with these guys.
Oh, that's awesome.
And yeah, it was a fantastic experience. Still have some friends over there, and that was kind of when I'm like, okay, this is absolutely the coolest stuff in the world. It's got kind of the computer technology side of it, which is super interesting. It's got the kind of hands-on, dexterous work, and you get to run this machine that takes a piece of carbide and runs it through metal, and it sounds and looks cool. So I started kind of applying for jobs in the greater Phoenix area to see if I could get into a machine shop full time. Now, obviously, the first thing I tried to do was get into the model shop there at Honeywell. But because it was already kind of like overly scrutinized, they weren't really actively hiring anybody. The guys were awesome. They absolutely tried their hardest to get me a position in there, but it was just kind of a tricky place to hire someone in. You know, their job titles were all, technician level four. They're not CNC machinists. They really tried to downplay what was going on. Um, and I applied to a bunch of jobs. This is 2014, 2015. Every one of these machine shops is paying like, 13, $14 an hour for entry level positions. And it wasn't looking great, but I didn't care. I wanted to get into a machine shop. And one of the few people to get back to me was this place called Walters Precision in Tempe. And so I go down and I show up for the interview, and I have a nice collared Carhartt shirt on, and I cleaned up my work boots, and I have my shirt tucked in, and I step into the lobby, and there's another guy sitting in the lobby, suit, tie, and I'm like, "Oh shit. Did I totally misread this? Have I fucked this up?" Well, the owner of Walters, second generation owner, Greg, comes in, takes the first guy back in the shop, returns, and grabs me to take me through a walkthrough and kind of give me an interview on the road. And the first thing he says is you're the first guy that showed up dressed appropriately for this interview. I'm like, oh, thank God, thank God,
Oh,
I
that's
read the room
great.
right. Um, and so he starts walking me through the shop, and I didn't realize this at first, but looking back, I recognize the equipment now. You open the doors, you walk in. The first thing you see is a SIP Hydroptic 6P. I didn't know any better, but this is a huge manual jig boring machine with old traditional glass etch scales, and you look through these viewfinders to see the etchings on the scales. This is like a super, super cool machine. To me, it looked just like a giant ass Bridgeport that had been around the block a couple times.
Right, yeah, there's a
Uh,
number 3 that shows up from time to time on Craigslist in Phoenix, and I'm always like, "You know what? I don't need this, I have no business having this, but I really want it." Like, it's just so cool.
it's a little piece of like precision history. It is. They were so advanced for their time, and they're still wicked capable today if you find one in good condition.
Right.
Um, so he keeps walking me through the shop, and they had a lot of late model equipment in there. We round the corner, and sitting back to back or side to side is two Hermla C400s. Now, because I'm weird, I have spent every waking hour that I'm not working at Honeywell in the last year on the internet, browsing through different manufacturers' machines. I've read the Heidenhain manuals on the 420 and 530 cover to cover for fun. Like I haven't actually ever worked on any of this equipment, but I know a lot about it. And as he walks me past, I say, "Oh, you have a couple of Hermlas. Oh, that's TNC 530. Or are you guys doing this and this and this?" And he just looks at me, and I can see he's trying to figure out how the fuck do I know what any of this stuff is. I've just got done telling him I've never worked in a machine shop before, and he doesn't actually say anything to me. But we finished the interview, and he's very gracious, and he says, "Okay, Mickey, I want you to go home. I don't want you to say anything to me right now. I want you to sit down with your wife. I want you to decide what you need to be whole as far as what sort of wage would work for you, and make sure." He's like, "I want you to make sure your family's taken care of." Uh, you know, and he kind of lays out a couple of things for me. And he says, then send me an email and we'll talk. And for anybody out there, especially young machinists listening, I'll say that I'm like probably the self-proclaimed poster child for um, a good attitude and work ethic getting me way farther in my career than my skills ever would have. And when you're interviewing with someone and the first thing they say to you regarding your wages is to figure out what's healthy and what works for you and get back to them, that's a really good sign.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, for sure.
So I get back home, I sit down with my wife. I'm like, this is such an incredible opportunity. I'll go work for them for free. They don't even have to pay me. Like I wanted, and she's like, we weren't married at the time, but I think she's like, okay, you can't go work for free. We have bills. Um, but I basically started doing the math to see what the smallest number was that I could work for. And I probably came up with something like 14 or 15 bucks an hour. But I remember what Greg said kind of regarding don't undersell yourself. Don't give me a number that's not realistic. Give me what you need. And so I said, fuck it, 20 bucks an hour. And I sent him an email back, thank you. I really appreciate being, showing me through the shop. I would absolutely love an opportunity to come work for you. Here's what makes sense for me, XYZ. A day later, I get an email back. When can you start? So I'm like, okay, this is freaking
Wow.
awesome. So um, I show up for my first day of work. This is a couple weeks after having left Honeywell, expecting to be on some of the manual equipment. The position they were hiring for was actually to train someone to run that SIP jig boring machine. And I noticed there's another guy in the lobby when I showed up, and I thought I recognized him from the interviews. And I'm like, well, this is fucking weird. Why is there two of us here? Well, sure enough, they walk him in and he gets to work with some of the guys who are working on the SIP, and they walk me right past the SIP. He walks me right over to the two Hermalas, and he plops me down next to his lead 5-axis guy, Josh, and says, okay, your job is to watch Josh. Everything he does, everything, setups, programming, you learn everything he knows. And that was kind of, the rest is history, right? I spent the next 2 years kind of glued to Josh's side, learning everything I could from him, and kind of got thrust into this position where I skipped like all the building blocks and went right to complex 5-axis stuff. And
That's
that was
crazy.
it was probably really it's what I needed to be successful as a person, especially because I came at this a little later than most guys. At the same time, it probably robbed me of some of the skills that make a really good machinist a really good machinist, right? When you learn how to set up the preset table correctly on a TNC 530 before you really learn how to correctly clamp down a part so you're not, twisting it, that comes back to bite you in the ass
That's fair,
eventually.
yeah. So how
Um,
how much of that reading that you did you have to relearn, like, the proper way? Because
I'd,
there's,
I'd s-
book knowledge and then there's, like, the practical implementation of that knowledge.
I'd say most of it, to be frank, because when you're taking something at face value in a book versus actually applying it, there's really it's totally different. Now, having said that, I could make much more pointed decisions. I could ask much more intelligent questions and get to the answers I was looking for a lot faster, having kind of a better idea of how the whole, we'll say, system works. But this is certainly an industry where the two go hand in hand. The book knowledge is important, but the practical application is super important as well.
Is that
Uh,
something you'd recommend, though, to somebody who's, like, looking to get into 5-axis eventually? Just, like, go and read, the Heidenhain manuals?
it really, and Heidenhain is great. The manuals, they're all translated from German, so you gotta keep that in mind. So the way the Germans, the way that some of the things are phrased, you're gonna read it and go, "What the heck?" Like
Well, you're
preset.
either getting that or you're getting, Fanuc translated from Japanese to
Yeah, I
English.
guess
Like,
I
unless you
guess
buy a
it's
Haas, you're getting a translated manual 90% of the time.
you're absolutely correct. But having that sort of fundamental understanding of the architecture and the hierarchy and how what they call difference, just knowing that your preset table is your G54 through G55.9999. This is your work coordinate system table. If you had never opened a Heidenhain manual, when you saw the datum table, you might think that the datum table is where you set your datum. That's not actually where you do that at all. You set it in the preset table because for the Germans, the presetting is a location of your part. The datum would be man-made or software-made transformations and rotations,
Oh, really?
not just where your part is at in the machine.
That's exactly what I would have assumed. So yeah, you're 100% right.
So there's some of that stuff that you'll pick up on, and Siemens documentation is a little bit trickier because the systems are used. Well, I guess for every Heidenhain installation, there's probably 5 Siemens, and they're on a bunch of Siemens has 800 series controllers on hydraulic brake presses or press brakes. So the manuals are a little bit more dicey, but you can find all that stuff online and familiarize yourself with it. And if you have the time to do it, it's absolutely worth doing it.
Yeah, well,
Um,
and I haven't done it yet, but the Heidenhain guys at IMTS were telling me you can download like a simulator too and just run it in a shell.
so you're absolutely correct. There's a couple different ways to do that. Yeah, you'd have to reach out to the Heidenhain folks. But what's nice from you can if you have a Heidenhain machine, you can VNC to it, which is pretty cool too, and you can basically run the control from your desktop. So you have all the functions you have in front of the machine at any computer. You could remote into it too. Um, it's Heidenhain is an awesome, awesome, awesome platform. Having spent a lot of time with Siemens machines, I'll always put Heidenhain a little over the Siemens counterparts. A little bit different to understand because their language is a little bit different than everyone else. Everything is a line or a circle, versus your regular. You're used to seeing a G1 or G2, G3. You
Right.
won't see any of that in Heidenhain. But once you wrap your head around it, it starts to make sense. And anything you do at the control is pretty intuitive. There's a mask for everything that you can expand every cycle, and it kind of walks you through what all the different values in each cycle mean. Um, I don't
Right.
know
Well,
how
that's what
Fanuc
Zoltan was
is.
saying about his Heidenhain is that like MDI, it won't let you put in incorrect syntax when you're building like an MDI line, basically.
Yep, yeah, that's absolutely it. It's gonna kind of put you on the path to success.
It's
On the
cool.
flip side, sometimes things can be a little bit frustrating because, like, you know what you want to do, but finding the right cycle or the right function to do that um, can be a little bit tricky. But it's a great platform.
Awesome. So where did you go from Walters and how did you get to J&J?
So I after 2.5 years at Walters, I was kinda at the point where I was ready to be like the 5-axis guy, except that the 5-axis guy already existed. I have 2 of them actually, because they had some other equipment there too. And, Greg, had a lot of these his 2 senior guys have been with him for a really long time. He had a great relationship with him. There would have been absolutely no reason to kind of, like, thrust me in between them and kinda upset that whole balance. So I started having understood that, I started looking around, and I found a little turbine shop actually just a few miles up the road that was growing really fast and needed some extra higher level programming support, and decided to take a job with them, AZ Metalcraft.
I've
And
actually heard that name before. That sounds
yeah,
familiar.
Jeff Mead owns it, runs it with his son. Um, again, if you can strike gold twice, Greg at Walters, a fantastic human being. Jeff, absolutely fantastic guy as well. Gave me an opportunity over there. So I put my time in, my 2 weeks in at Walters. Greg's upset, but he understands where I'm at. I take the position at AZ Metalcraft, and it's not but 2 weeks, 3 weeks into this job, my buddy Riley over at Nikola says, "Oh my God, I didn't know you were leaving Walters. I finally have these machines installed at Nikola. This is a Zimmerman FC37 gantry, as well as a DMG DMU 125 FD, DMC 125 FD, and a
Jeez.
DMG 85 monoblock." And he says, "Why didn't you tell me you're leaving? I absolutely need another guy. You should be over here running all this." And I'm like, "Oh my god, here's this big empty shop with millions of dollars and like the most badass 5-axis machines you could buy. Like this." So I had to do something that I had never thought in my life I was going to do, but I walked into my boss's office, Jeff's office, and I said, "Hey Jeff, this is really awkward." He just spent all this time like onboarding me and everything. Right now he's in a financial hole, right? When you bring a new employee on, I'm sure you've kind of probably considered this or thought about the numbers. It's a huge financial burden, especially for a small machine shop in the beginning.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Well, it's like you don't hire for capacity now. You hire it for like 6 months down the line, and then you're like, okay, now they're full quote unquote employee.
Absolutely. So I kind of go into his office, hat in hand, um, kind of explain to him the situation. At the same time, my uh, wife was pregnant. There were some challenges with the pregnancy, so there's a little bit of stress at home. Um, the Nikola thing offered a few things. It offered a really fair wage, some great benefits, a really flexible work schedule. And that was just kind of out of respect to Jeff. Jeff was really frank with me from the very first day that, like, family is first, right? If you need to be out of here because of something with your family, go do it. At the same time, Jeff can't afford to be paying people that aren't working, right?
Right. There's a
So
big difference between like VC money and small business money.
exactly. So he kinda understood where I was at and, reluctantly, kind of said, "I understand, you gotta go do what's best for you and your family." And I took the Nikola job, and, boy, was that a trip. Anybody that watches the news, you woulda known that Nikola had a lot of really cool things going for it and, some really exciting projects that kinda got overshadowed by, some decisions and some stuff that was said. We could go as deep into that as you want, but yeah, ambitious tech startup, um kind of accused of overselling what they had. But for me, that wasn't my focus. My focus was, hey, I have this Zimmerman, these two DMGs. How are we going to leverage them in the best way possible to do all the prototype stuff in house? And we worked on some pretty cool stuff together. So in the beginning, Nikola had a really wide range of products they were looking to deliver on. Everything from the truck, the side by side. It was kind of people thought that it was maybe a little too much and they just needed to focus on the truck. And there's absolutely, they're not wrong. But I think what some people failed to see at the same time, too, is these other platforms weren't, hey, we're just going to go do this other thing completely for fun. It's like, well, we need an excuse to develop, this bit of infrastructure for the electronic system, or we want to do. These were just kind of different ways to test out different systems and functions that all kind of were part of the same hierarchy. They weren't spur of the moment. There's no parts shared between this and this. So there was some method to the madness there, and we worked on some fuel cell stuff. We did suspension and drivetrain components for the side by sides. The Zimmerman we use primarily for clay milling. Actually,
Oh,
there's a
really?
huge there's a huge design shop there, and they would bring in full scale clay models, and we would mill these huge clay models. um, Zimmerman actually tells it the Zimmerman we had was being sold to Apple. Actually, it was a canceled Apple order to do clay models for their electric car.
So you were actually in a model shop.
I was in a big model shop. We go full circle from Honeywell, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that was super cool. That was a great place to network and meet a ton of people. So we were using Hypermill full time. Got to know some of the folks on the DMG team pretty well. Some of the Zimmerman people pretty well. Um, and I guess that's another point I'll drive home. Networking in this industry is freaking huge. The stuff that can do for your business, for your career. Um, Never underestimate what 5 minutes talking to somebody can do down the road, because I'm fortunate to be where I am today, largely in part because of relationships that I cultivated and developed while I had some time there, and we're working with people all over the industry.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. I completely agree. And it's one of those things where you never know when that return is going to be. Like you might meet somebody 8 years ago and then all of a sudden they pop back up because of XYZ. And you're like, oh, awesome. I know this person. I have a connection.
Absolutely, and I got some great advice too early on, which was, the whole bridge burning thing, right? Everyone will tell you not to burn any bridges, but seriously, don't you're gonna have these employees, management or otherwise, could be your peers that you really disagree with, but what you learn in this industry really fast is you bump into the same people over and over and over again, and that guy that
Yeah.
was such a freaking asshole and you just was a all of a sudden he's got some high level position with another partner whose product you really need to be successful, and you don't want to be the guy that the last thing said to him was like, "Hey, fuck you, man. I hope I hope I never see your dumb ass again." And then all of a sudden it's like, "Oh shit, I need to
Yeah.
work with these guys now."
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah. So before we continue, you bring up a really good point, and a question I wanted to ask is: it seems like you've had a really good grasp on when your time was done at places and how to, I don't know, nicely move from one place to another without burning those bridges. So, like, what advice can you give people about understanding when you're at your limit at a place? And it sounds like the nice thing is you never got to the limit of like I hate this place. It was just like I have outgrown this place.
So this is kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I'll circle back around to the, you know, networking and a good attitude and a good ethic have gotten me way further in this industry than my skill. And so naturally, I've gravitated to working at places where, any small to medium business owner needs you to be able to perform some sort of task that brings value to their business, right? At the same time, if that's all they care about, you're kind of not putting yourself in a great position for personal and professional growth, right? Every guy that I've gone to work for has always been concerned with how I'm doing as a person, how my family's doing, how's my personal life in order. And when you go to work with people like that, you're naturally going to progress in a meaningful way. And at the same time, I think these people are going to understand when you may have outgrown your position, or at least be able to sympathize with you coming to them and saying, "Hey, I think this is, kind of the best time for me to try something different, grow this way." There's absolutely merit too, at growing some roots, right? I don't want to encourage young men and women in this field to, every time they've been somewhere for a year or two, okay, this has been great. Our industry's kind of famous for that, right?
Oh
Um,
yeah, definitely.
but, it's gonna be a little bit of a balancing act. My goal would be for everyone to find a place like I'm at now where I could die here and they could bury me out in the parking lot, 40 years from now. At the same time, it took a little bit of jumping around to get here, and this is, like, super common in the tech industry and stuff, right? It's also, like, a lot of buyers, procurement, project management. I have some peers that were at Nikola, and you look between, like, 2012 and 2018, they had, like, 19 different jobs. You're
Yeah.
like, "Oh my god."
Especially, yeah,
Um,
buyers and stuff, like you were saying, don't burn bridges, especially with those people, because those people jump around like crazy, and, like, all of a sudden, you might really want work from a company, and it's like, "Oh, it's that buyer that I threw under the bus. Great. I'm done."
Absolutely. You gotta go into every opportunity with some goals in mind, and be ready to change those goals, right? The cool stuff that you see day one when you tour a shop isn't going to be cool to you 5 years from that point. That's just
Right.
not how any of this stuff works. But you need to have a good feeling about the people you're working with and for. And I'm sure there's some people that'll listen and say, well, that's a sort of privileged attitude, right? Everyone's got bills to pay. You need to put, food on your table. And so I'm not trying to discredit, those people at all, but um yeah, life's way too short to be unhappy with what you're doing and where you're at. And
So,
there's
like,
there's
at Walters, was it like a light bulb moment where you were like, "I need to progress my career and go somewhere else," or was it like a slow feeling that came up? Like, where was that breaking point for you?
I think it was a little bit slower feeling, as I was kind of getting more experience and doing more and more stuff on my own. And it was kind of and this is sort of the snotty egotistical side of me. Here I am, a machinist of 2 years, looking at a guy that's been doing it for 15 and having my sort of smart ass attitude. I wouldn't do it like that. Uh, by the way, that started at Walters. Okay, so here I am. I've been machining for like 5 minutes. It's an exaggeration. I think I had programmed and set up my first part. It was actually on a 3 axis mill they had, and I had just started machining it. And here's this guy, Garrett. He's been a machinist for like 35 years. The dude is like, borderline genius. And he's over my shoulder and he's going, "Oh, I wouldn't do it like that." And so what do? I hit like the E stop right away. And I'm like, "Oh my God, what's wrong? What am I doing?" And he just walks away. And that probably happened like 25, 30 times the first 6 months I was there until I realized that was just everyone being kind of, a smart ass to the new guy. And that's
Right.
that's how the whole "I wouldn't do it like that" started.
Okay, I
Um,
appreciate the story because yeah, there was probably 5 or 6 DMs from different people just saying that when I posted for questions yesterday. So
yeah,
yeah,
so it turned into a joke over time. And if I've probably had a couple people DM me like, "Why are you such an asshole? Why would you, just randomly say it?" I'm like, "It's just a joke." I wouldn't say that to anybody who didn't understand it or know me well enough to know that I was just kidding.
right.
But
Well, and I think anybody in this trade long enough, you realize there are many ways to skin that cat. So like you saying I wouldn't do it that way does not mean it's the wrong way. It is just not your way.
well, put the shoe on the other foot. How many times have you walked up to somebody else's program and thought to myself, "Yep, that's exactly how I would have machined exactly like
Right.
that." It's,
Yeah.
it's never happened, right?
I've
So,
even used it on Brad, my business partner. I'd be like, "Well, yeah, I mean, if it works, it works." But like, I wouldn't have done it like that. Sure.
what's funny is one of the owners here, John Lenz Jr. He is sort of famous. Another guy. He's been machining his whole life. Wicked, wicked smart. Um, he'll here I am. I kind of have my shit together now, and he will still walk up and tell me, "Phew, I'm not sure I'd be doing it that way." And then of course, if it works perfect, you never hear another peep out of him. And if it ends up not working, he's gone, "Oh,
I
I
told you
told you I
so.
wouldn't have done it like
Yeah.
that."
All
But
right. So, how did we get from Nicola to where you are now? Then.
networking. So this big old corn-fed Midwesterner comes into J&J. His name's Joel Carter, and he works for a little company called Fraser USA.
Oh yeah, I
And
know Joel pretty well. He's a great guy.
Joel is a fantastic dude, isn't he? I had reached out to Frasia because we were working on something together with Open Mind. It was a newer release. It's pretty widely spread nowadays, but it was their virtual machine center. It was Hypermill's first crack at actual like G code simulation, not just simulating cam code, but actually post processing the code and then simulating using the post process code.
Gotcha.
um, we were one of the first customers using it on the Zimmerman big gantry mill. And we had a meeting with them to kind of discuss some of the things we like, some of the things we didn't like, where we'd like to see development going. And we were talking with Peter Brams, who is an Open Mind employee. And I might misspeak here, but I'm quite certain is sort of, we'll say, the godfather of barrel mills. So he was
Oh,
the guy
interesting.
that, like 15 years ago, was working at Open Mind and said, "Hey, we have this idea for this tool that would have this large radius on it." And he's the one that went with Open Mind to Amugi and got them to grind the first set of tools. And Hypermill kind of developed the cam cycles. Amugi developed the tools, and thus, barrel milling hit the main stage. Well, I think that relationship had kind of gone its own way over the past 5 or so years. And he was talking to me about Frasia's circle segment cutters. And kind of encouraged me to reach out to those guys. So I remember after getting off the meeting, blasting over an email to them, and a guy I didn't know at the time, Doug, reached back out to me, and the rest is sort of history. But anyway, a couple weeks later, I have Joel into the shop to talk to me about some Frasia tooling, and I'm like, "Well, this stuff is so fucking expensive. Who the hell would buy it?" He was like, "There's no way that $180 end mill could be better than, 100." We had really great SGS support. I don't know if you've ever worked with Trace Jacobs, but
I
Trace is a
haven't, no.
freaking awesome dude. Have him down to the shop sometime.
Okay.
Tell him to bring you some barbecue.
Okay.
But so he's the SGS rep for Phoenix. Wicked smart guy. Um, wasn't ever a machinist, but has been in tool sales for 35 years, but has been in like technical tool sales, not just I know my catalog numbers and my prices. Like he helped people solve some really challenging problems through the 80s, 90s, early knots. Worked with the Honeywells, done a lot of really cool projects, and just a genuinely intelligent guy that's like borderline materials scientist. Anyway, how can this $180 Fraser NML be any better than my $100 SGS, Z carb? It's yeah, it's got a variable helix, variable flute spacing. Yes, it's got the same. It's got this really. Joel says we make a really good end mill. SGS makes a really good end mill. One of the things that sets us apart is all the data behind the tools, and that's kind of when I got introduced to Frasia's tool expert.
Yep.
And when you start to understand that paying more for an end mill that comes with really good, reliable data and support starts making financial sense really quickly, especially when you're working in materials that you're not familiar with or you're using tool types that you're not familiar with. Because these guys literally have just about one of every GF machine in the line, from the little HSM 200X thing that's the size of a kern all the way up through the big Mill P800, sitting at their facility in Switzerland in a lab. And all they do is use these machines to generate all the feed and speed data for every application you can imagine. And so we kind of developed a relationship with the Fraser guys while I was at Nikola. And when my tenure there was kind of coming to an end after the stock had crashed and there was kind of this exodus of people, and I kind of made the decision, not based on money or anything else, but when Trevor was there, Trevor was this sort of this mind that wanted to see us develop a bunch of these really cool projects. And when Trevor departed, the company really changed its focus to we have to get trucks made. The right decision for the business? Abso-freaking-lutely. The right decision for Mickey Jacobs in a prototype machine shop that wants really cool exotic projects? Not so great.
Right.
So that was kind of when I decided, okay, it's time for me to find my real home. And one of the people I reached out to was Doug over there at Frasia, and I said, "Hey, I'm going to be looking for a new role." He had said the Midwest was full of medical manufacturers that were paying well. There was a lot of great companies out here. He said, "Hey, let me put some feelers out for you and see if there might be an opportunity out here." Meanwhile, I had talked to some people. I wasn't going back to California. Wasn't doing the Bay Area thing again. Just wasn't for me. Dennis was right in the middle of moving his shop from California to Idaho. And so he's like, dude, you need to come work for me. And I'm like, yeah, but I am not really in a wait 6 to 12 months, sort
Right.
of position right now. I talked to some manufacturers. There's some aerospace up in Colorado. Talked to some folks up there. Talked to a few people in Phoenix. Um, and Doug gets back to me and he says, "Hey, you need to reach out to the guys at J&J Machine. They're in Elk River, Minnesota, and just have a discussion with them." Doug was vaguely familiar with some of the equipment that J&J had and what they were working on, and it all sounded pretty cool. More DMG machines. I was pretty familiar with them. Medical devices is newer to me, but I was pretty sure that I could figure my way through it. And set up so I set up a phone interview. I have a phone interview with these guys, and it's Corey Lenz. So Corey is your age and mine. He's in his mid 30s. He's a third generation Lenz. It's John Lenz Jr. So second generation ownership. Johnny will be 59, 60, 60 now. God, that guy is so fucking old. I think he's one I want to say he's about 60. And I believe John Senior, the first J in J and J, was on the call as well. And John Senior's 82 years old, still 30, 35 hours a week here in the shop, like going
Wow.
full bore. And so I'm on a call with these guys, and I happen to mention, like, yeah, I sat down, I read the Hide and Hide manuals cover to cover for fun. That's just kind of like what I'm interested in. And Johnny's like, "Get the fuck out of here." He's like, "I sat down and read all the Fanic manuals cover to cover because I thought that was fun back when I was, out on the shop floor." And this sort of bromance started forming. So I fly out here, and I spend the first night at Doug's place, and I get up the next morning and to go to the interview, and I get like halfway here, and my tire goes flat, and I'm like, "Oh shit, I'm gonna be late for this fucking interview."
Oh, no.
I fill it up again, it goes flat again. I filled it up 3 times on the way over here. I get to the interview just in time. I'm all worried that, like, "Oh god, I flew all the way out here. These guys are gonna think I'm an idiot. I'm gonna show up late." And I show up to the interview, just made it on time. Corey lets me in the building. We have a walk through the facility. Johnny and I bump into each other. We're dressed almost matching, Carhartt shirt, Carhartt pants, work boots, and we're just kind of looking at each other. And I'm like, this must be your dad, John. So he and I just kind of hit it off, just totally nerds for machining, right?
Right.
Like, this is fun. I don't think there's a lot of people out there that really, they might appreciate manufacturing, they might enjoy some of the time they have in their shop, but for me, this is like an unhealthy obsession, right? I'd rather uh, be here than doing just about anything else other than spending time with my family. If I was independently wealthy, I'd have a 5-axis machine in my garage just so I could play with it more when I wasn't at work. And
Yep.
that's really who Johnny was too. So what Johnny was looking to do is find a person that could sort of fit a role here at J&J that could grow with Corey as the business kind of gets handed off to the next generation. So he and his dad spent the last 35 years, 40 years building the company to where it's at. It's in Corey's hands now, and it's like, okay, it's yours to take wherever you want to go. Corey is the yin to Johnny's yang. Corey is super good on the customer side, understands the financials and the HR. There's a super funny story. He's been in the shop with his dad since he was just a young guy, but I think he was 14, 15, 16 years old, and they put they put him on one of the old Matsuras on the other side of the wall here, and he didn't have his offsets right, and so he has a 3-inch shell mill come down and just start freaking mowing through this part, 2 or 300,000 depth of cut.
Oh,
And these old
geez.
Matsuras, they'll just do it.
Oh, yeah.
So what does Corey do? Corey just turns tail and starts running across the shop, just runs away from the machine. And I think the old timer behind him just kind of spun around and nonchalantly hits the e-stop button. And so that's kind of the tale of Corey out in the machine shop. So
Oh,
Corey's
boy.
really well built to be in the front end of the building on the customer facing side. And Johnny was kind of looking for someone to put on the kind of back half on the machine side. Um, what do we need to be doing as far as investing in new equipment? Where's the industry going to be in 5 years? Where's it going to be in 10 years? Uh, what can we do to automate around our shortcomings? All these sort of questions from somebody who's, not financially motivated and really outside of your own family. It's kind of hard to find someone who's ultimately not really interested in money, but here's my dumbass that would gladly work for free if somehow my bills were paid for.
Right. Give me the
I
fancy toys. I don't care
I
about
would
the
just,
money.
that's what it is. And you know, I think someone at one time said, well, if you won the lottery tomorrow, you could just buy all your own crap. And it's like, this is what people don't understand about business ownership is it's not just go and run cool machines every day, Dylan, as I'm sure you know. All the stress of looking after the financials and bringing the work in and taking care of all the HR stuff. I don't want to do any of that. I just want to show up, program, and run cool machines, and I'm getting paid to do that right now. This is like a fairy tale. Um,
Well, Well, that's epic. So you brought up a lot of the questions actually we got from listeners. Specifically, the first ones we have from Josh NH Micro. He wanted to talk about automation because you just got this kern. So his first one was, What's your thought process when planning automation, palette changing? What hurdles have come up that you often try to proactively combat?
So this is something that I spent a lot of time studying ahead of time. But if Dennis sits down and listens to this, he's going to do it the whole time laughing, because Dennis is someone who's been automating, for 10 years now, 10 years plus, and here I am. I'm pretty green to the game, but what he doesn't realize is, even though I give him shit every time we talk, I'm actually listening to what he's saying, and listening to his challenges and his solutions. And we're pretty fortunate to live in a day and age where information's really accessible, right? So we are the first automated machines we had were a pair of these DMP 70s. It's a DMG Milltap 700 that they adapted with a fifth axis trunnion. It's got the sort of carousel tool changer on it, and it's kind of funny and ironic. But the first issue is chip management. It's like a way bigger deal than anybody realizes on a couple different levels, because you think of, chip management, it's like, okay, the chips need to go down into the conveyor. That's really just the beginning of it, right?
Right.
Um,
You're like, oh, all of a sudden that left corner is built up with chips and it's causing over travel issues or something, or like binding something
exactly.
up.
Or, I have through coolant tools that just default to through coolant and hyper melt. Well, I'm not pocketing. I don't really need through coolant. And the problem with through coolant is it blasts all the chips up to stick to the ceiling, to stick to the face of the spindle. And then when you go to probe tools, all the shit's dripping back down and disrupting the laser, and you get issues over there. So that's been something that it's never really a problem that's solved. It's just kind of a problem that's managed. Um, so kind of figuring out the whole, chip management thing, and that's now on the pallets too. How do you keep it from building up on the pallet? Because then the robot comes in to grab it, and maybe the robot grabs the pallet fine, but now as it pulls it through the door, some of the chips fall off and it gets stuck in the door, and now the door's not closing right. Or it brings it in and leaves a big mess on the pallet racks on the inside, and the pallet doesn't sit on the rack properly, and the next time it goes to grab it, there's an issue.
Right.
So it's something that's like, every time you fix a little bit of it, something else happens. You kind of just move the problem to different areas, and it's just kind of being managed all the time.
So what ones
um,
have you found on the current? Because Josh also has an HD, and you guys are both using the internal automation. You because Aroa's what 15, 18 months out at this
God, that
point.
is that is so depressing. They're telling us March right now. We should have ours, and we ordered in April. Um,
So yeah, what are you finding? What challenges are you having to work around, and how have you done it on the HD?
So the first thing for us was the ceiling ring on the Kern. That was a huge upgrade. So um, I doubt Andy's ever going to listen to it, but that big Polish son of a gun, he told me the first time we spoke that he wasn't sure the ceiling ring would fit with the internal gripper. The ceiling ring certainly does fit, and that was a huge help. So you have an exposed ITS 148 power chuck. It's actually um, allowed to be soiled. It's allowed to get dirty because it purges air through the chuck where all the carbide pads sit for the pallets. But in reality, it doesn't, it's not adequate, right? So at first we were using a washdown cycle with a through coolant tool where we tilt the table at 45 degrees and kind of align the through coolant tool so that the jet would go down and hit the face of the chuck and spin the part around and kind of clear off the chuck. That worked okay. The next issue is the laser on the Kern. Bless these sweet, sweet Germans that I love to death. Their market for people that are really removing a high volume of chips is not super high, I don't think.
Right.
And here I am. We're going to rough everything out in the Kern because why not? The laser is on a 45-degree to the trunnion. So guess what you have right there? A perfect place for tons and tons of chips to build up. So I actually 3D printed a little wedge that fits in between the laser and the trunnion. And now it's more of a smooth transitional surface.
Oh, that's smart. I like that.
It was the simplest thing and it's a little tricky because the trunnion is a casting, so it's not like perfectly flat or round.
Right.
So I printed up a couple of them and kind of sanded them down and fit them in there. Now at the same time, you don't want to wedge it in there because then you're actually going to wedge the laser and you're going to throw that off. But just putting that insert in there, and no longer had like a V shape to actually catch chips and build up chips on there. But the laser is something that gets chip buildup. So we were using the washdown cycle to kind of go over and spray the laser off as well. Now we've gone to Eroa's sealing ring, which has basically eliminated all the issues as it relates to the chuck, pallets, seating, clamping, unclamping. It is the way to go. I have the manual version right now. They make a robot loadable version, and as soon as the robot gets here, I'll get the robot loadable version, so that when it knows when you go to switch to internal pallets, it'll grab that, set it on the chuck. If you go back to external pallets, it'll pull that sealing ring off. I think there's a 148 sealing ring too. It's really just a gasket that goes around the periphery, but I'll
Right.
probably look to put that in there as well
So you guys are
because
planning on using both then? The Compact
yeah,
80 and the internal pallet
it's not
system?
quite as sexy as it sounds. It's not like it's so high nine palette management is pretty damn good as far as on controller palette management works.
Right.
We're also using the batch process management utility, which kind of it'll read through all the programs, make sure there's no programming errors. Like you called up through coolant on a tool that doesn't have through coolant. It'll report out all the cycle times and it looks through your tool life database and can tell you, hey, you're going to have a tool expire here. It's going to interrupt machining. So
Oh, cool.
those two utilities combined are pretty darn good. Now, are they quite as slick as Aroa production line or Hermela's hacks or the Soflex? No, it's not quite that great. So it kind of looks like an Excel spreadsheet. That's really all Heidenhain palette management is. I'll have to tell it, grab these 10 internal palettes, run these programs. I'll have to make a program that tells it, hey, go grab a sealing ring now and put the sealing ring on or take it off. Now you can put this other. It doesn't know how to do any of that intelligently. You're kind of telling it to do all of that.
Gotcha.
But the tools are there to make it happen. But yeah, we'll have 55 pallets in the external magazine, ITS 148, and 30 in the internal. And I got a lot of jobs that only run 30, 45 minutes. So having that capacity is really will help to get us through the weekend. That's the goal, right? Like Friday to Monday morning.
Right.
If I can get that down without having my weekend guys over there babysitting anything, that's how you pay for expensive machines pretty quickly is being able to pull stuff like that off.
Totally. So his next question was about the automation QC feedback loop because you don't want to make a ton of scrap over the weekend too. So
I have never accidentally ran like 20 pallets of bad parts, so I absolutely have no idea what he's talking about.
yeah,
However,
sure. I've
if
made 20 parts in a row bad loading them myself, so I can only imagine with
so
pallets.
I'm in a pretty fortunate position here. J&J basically has two QC labs, um, and what we look to do is there's a pretty close working relationship between the machinist, programmer, and quality as we work through FAI. Right. Let's get that first part good. Now it's kind of on quality to make sure that they build out their end of the quality process, which is basically taking CMM programs, hard gauging, all the important data we need to collect and kind of packaging that up. So right now, if you were to walk into the quality lab with a traveler, you could look up we're not so sexy as to have barcodes or anything like that, but I can look up the part number. I can find the CMM program. I just open the CMM program and run it. And the first thing it's going to do is open up a document that shows me exactly how to set up the parts, and what program to run, what probe tips it's going to use, and it's kind of empowering the machinists to make sure that they're continually making good parts. So after you and I finish this morning, I'm going to go back there. I'm going to jump on some parts for a space customer, and I was validated this week. I was making good parts this week. I have no idea what that first part off the machine is going to look like, but I know I can go into the quality lab. I can get it's going to tell me exactly what fixturing to use to set the part up. I'm going to run through the CMM program. I'm going to be the first one to see the data, and it's on me to say, hey, is this good, or do we like what we see? Now also, you know the quality manager is a peer of mine. He's also another young guy. I'm in a pretty fortunate position where I can call him up and say, hey, Zach, something's really screwed up here. Can you kind of walk me through this, talk me through this? But
So,
it's
what about like weekend runs though? Are you doing in-process probing as well to verify dimensions?
Not so much on the machine because we have a couple CMMs available to do that. So the machine has a really, really simple probing routine on it right now that's just to check part orientation. That's all I'm doing. Um, as far as dimensions go, at least with some of the parts I'm working on, the machines, somebody I'm going to get hate mail from Kern after this. I don't trust the in machine probing to validate these parts. So we're actually working on some parts with an 8 micron profile tolerance, so plus or minus 4 microns. So I
That's
think that's
rough.
like 1/10, 50 millionth for those of you
Right.
playing the home game. And in a 5 axis machining center without a dedicated inspection probe, which is what the Kern is right now, um, excuse me, I'm not really sure I trust it to go in there and report on, if I'm still in my profile. Besides the fact a profile is actually really difficult to measure in the machine without some dedicated software.
So what's the
So
plan going forward? Like if you were running these all weekend and let's say you're not in on a Saturday, are you telling your weekend guys, "Hey, pull every third pallet, every fifth pallet and go run this CMM program?"
absolutely. So if you went to look at our bone plates instead, something that's a little bit more of a production item for us, there's actually, depending on what partner you have, there's either machinist in process QC checks where they're just once or twice a shift expected to collect a certain amount of data from hard gauges. Also, this operation is big enough that we have weekend quality people. So it would at least be the responsibility of the machinist to take a part out of the cell and get it down to somebody in quality to run. If they didn't have time or were not unable to run a CMM program, to run one of those programs. If we can, we try to simplify stuff as much as possible. So we have two different vision systems here. We have a Keyence unit. We also have an Optiv. That's something that's pretty dang simple. The Swiss guys use the Keyence stuff a ton, right? Throw a part on there. It's really quickly looking to see if the part's still in spec. The Optiv, a little bit bigger, a little bit more accurate, a little bit more finicky, right? Part has to be clean, it has to be orientated correctly. Um, but yeah, then that's absolutely the responsibility of the weekend guys. But when we circle back around, when we talk about running unattended Friday to Monday, it's about building a process robust enough to get me through the whole weekend. And I'm getting my ass kicked every day, right? Like I get my ass kicked in one night to the next morning. I come back in, what the fuck was that? What is going on? That first thread gauge, you go to gauge the hole and the thread gauge literally just slides down into the hole like
Uh-huh.
it's a pin instead. And it's like, oh, well, yeah, if you load a sister tool in and you don't actually probe it, or you do something else, um that none of anything else mattered. But my goal is really around the processes, because I don't want to count my chickens before they're hatched. And I'll issue a disclaimer: we have commercially available Hexagon Global S series CMMs. They are not Zeiss Prismo or whatever in climate controlled rooms. So we're right at the edge of what these CMMs are capable of. However, we're doing some things as far as calibrating the probe tip locally right next to the part and thermal compass. We're
Right.
seeing on
There's
the
quite a bit you can
Kern.
do on those. Like you can also do gauge verification checks where like if you're doing a whole you can probe a gauge ring and then use that as the master for that next inspection. Like
Exactly.
yes, there are limits to it, but you can get pretty good with the Global S.
The local accuracy is actually it's rated from the manufacturer. It's submicron. You can take that for what you want. So the first thing we do on these space parts, and it calibrates the probe 3 times, and it looks to see a standard deviation of less than 1 micron before it'll even start probing the part. But what we're seeing on the Kern right now is anywhere from about 1.5 to 4.5 microns deviation on this profile, which is basically the machine is wicked fucking accurate.
Yeah.
So, kind of having that information, it's more on me, the tooling, the setup, the process. If I can get that dialed in, I'm not really worried about like, oh, the machine moved 3/10. That's not what we're seeing right now.
Right.
So
So who dictates the quality process for these parts? Is it customer flowed down, or is it from you, or is it from your quality manager? Like, because yes, we all want to build robust systems, but I'm also a big fan of trust but verify. I mean, Brad knocks me all the time because I'll like double check that the door locked behind me, even though it's on automatic lock. And he's like, "What the hell are you doing?" I'm like, I trust it, but I also make sure that it's locked and that I know. So like
that's
you got to still inspect the parts regardless. So who is coming up with 1 in 5, 1 in 10 on these features?
that's a great attitude. I get shit from Corey all the time because I'll be on a hot part, we'll get signed off on FAI, and then like a day later he'll be like, "Hey, how many do you have done?" And I'll be like, "Well, I only got 2 done because I put in for FAI again." And he's like, "Why?" It's like, "Well, just because I made one right doesn't mean the next, until we see like 2 or 3 and you get like some standard deviation, right? I'm gonna wait before I push it into production." Everything, yeah, all 3 of those are valid. So we have stuff, from customers where we're required to do, CPK and stuff like that, where they're gonna dictate exactly how many parts we run, how often they're gonna be checked, what deviations are allowed. Um, where it's not a customer requirement, it's usually a combination of the machinists and the quality working together. Um, the nice thing about being a quote unquote family owned job shop, we're pretty small. We all know each other. We know the equipment in the building pretty well. We're learning that, yeah, if you throw something on the kern and you don't fuck with it, it's going to be really, really good 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 parts down the line. If you put something on our 35-year-old Matsura with 160,000 hours on the spindle, you might want to check it every, this many parts. So
Wait, you mean those machines grow? Who would have guessed?
it's kind of a team effort if it's not a customer requirement. So like the bone plate thing was something that we worked on together. We really only started uh, producing bone plates in production seriously about a year and a half ago, and it was a little bit of trial and error. We were checking them every couple of parts and actually molding the locking screw profile, which is a pain in the ass. And what we learned after a little while is, hey, we're not really having an issue with this, but we're having an issue with this and this instead. So let's check these. Okay, well, we're only having those issues maybe every 500 parts. So if we check one every 24 hours, that's probably more than adequate for developing a sort of process or a, a quality system that is going to identify when there is an issue. And now we're to the point where, hey, we know this is going to happen. So when we change from this part number to this other part number, it's the same bone plate. One's just a little longer than the other. We're just going to go ahead and switch out these 2 tools because we know those are the tools that are always the problem. If we switch them out now, we're never going to see the issue. And you kind of build off of that. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. The quality requirements are there, but I had a nighttime guy the other day where I was tied up on a part, so I loaded up the robot in the morning. I basically let it run all day. A tool broke halfway during the day. I had no clue. And he came in and just reloaded the whole robot and started running
Oh
again.
no.
And it wasn't until the next morning when he was doing his, once per shift checks, which was really more than 24 hours since the last check had been done. He realized that the last 5 plates during my shift were bad, and the 12 he made during his shift were bad.
Oh,
So,
geez.
you're still gonna run into issues there, and, that's a mistake that's probably only ever gonna be made once, mostly because that person realizes, like, "Oh, shit. That's a shitty feeling."
Right. So are you guys starting to add like tool breakage on everything just to check?
Yeah, yeah. So then the current is really easy because Heidenhain is just a gem to work with. The DMPs are a little bit more challenging, mostly because it's a slimmed down product. It doesn't have things like through spindle air, which is wicked important for getting coolant out of like through coolant drills that
Right.
otherwise will literally drain down over like 5 minutes, right? Um, we have a DMU 50 as well that we'll be getting a robot in the new year. Um, it's a little bit more well positioned to do stuff like that, but I'm a tool breakage nut. I have the macros saved as hypermill tool paths basically, so I can just drop them in whenever I want. There's a Heidenhain version and a Siemens version, and it's freaking sweet. It's like my bread and butter. The bloom that we have on the Kern is awesome because it's the dialogic. Well, it's the fancy scanning one.
Right. The new one, yeah.
Yeah, so can scan the profile of a ball end mill and actually be like, well, yeah, your tool's still there, but there's a chip, 35 degrees up on the ball where you're actually using it. And like, oh, hey, that's kind of a big deal because you could be leaving a ton of rest material, or if you're trying to hold the surface finish, well, it's could be just absolutely garbage. But the tool's still there, so a regular brake cycle isn't gonna be like, hey, there's an issue.
Right.
I haven't actually started using that yet, but that's a pretty cool tool to have.
Well, so Josh's last question was what has been some of the best lessons you've learned as your time as a machinist? And alternatively, what is the best piece of advice you've been given?
Best lesson learned, I think you just hit on, Dylan, which is trust but verify. Um, I can't tell you how many times I've like gotten something, a part all set up, probed in, gone back to my desk, like posted out the code. I come back to the machine, and I'm like, what? I'm just gonna fucking probe this thing one more time
Uh-huh. Yep.
and just be like, oh shit, I saved into the wrong offset. It was 4 inches below. I was just about to send, a tool right into the freaking vise. And
Yeah.
and as obviously as you get more experience, you things like that happen less and less and less. But I don't think a week goes by where I don't catch some little, oh shit, I would have fucked that up if I didn't check that
Uh-huh.
again.
Yeah.
Um,
The more I am in machining, the more paranoid I get about myself. I'm like, wow, human error really is a thing, and it's 100% me. And yeah, like I will load up tools, probe them, and then be like, shit, did I probe that last one? I'll just probe it again. It's really quick. Just screw it. It's safer. I'd rather be safe than sorry.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And it's like a vicious cycle, right? Because either you're a newbie and you screw up because you don't know any better, or you're experienced and you screw up because it's all just like second nature to you and you forget to do the basic shit again. And you just like, ah, fuck. Like I haven't done that in 5 years, but I just did it now because I was worried about the three other things I'm doing instead of this thing that's in front of me.
Oh yeah. Well, I've said it a million times on the podcast, but my first boss, when I was working there, I started as an unpaid intern. Like, could say I didn't know anything. They were hiring for a Mastercam programmer, and I was like, "Well, I don't know Mastercam, but I'm going to school for it, so I might." And they're like, "Well, we can't pay you, but you can work here." I was like, "Fair, fair, fair. Yeah, that's fair enough." But after like a month or two, I hadn't really made any like big mistakes, and he turned to me. He was like, "Can you just fuck up already so that I can start trusting you?" He's like, "You're going to make mistakes, and like I just want you to do them now so that I can start trusting you with stuff because you're good, but like I know you're gonna screw something up." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, that's fair."
Well, I got that out of my system pretty early because about 6 months into my tenure at Walters, I plowed one of those C400s into the table at about
Oh
Mach 5, and I
no.
got to see just how robust those crush washers on Hermla spindle. Now, anybody who thinks that whole thing is a fucking sham, I smashed that machine. 2 days later, there was a technician and his apprentice at our shop at 8:15 in the morning. By 11:15, the spindle had already been dropped, all the bushings had been replaced, had been put back in, and they had already redone the geometry on the machine, and it was repeating better than it was when they installed it because they have the factory calibration
Right.
data right next to it. And I actually have a little puka shell necklace now with the little crush washers. And there's my grown ass, 22, 23 years old. I think I actually had tears in my eyes when I did that. I felt so freaking bad. But that is a
Oh,
mistake. I am happy to report in a few years now, I have only made once.
all right.
And yeah, so I got that out of my system at a good time.
So what about the best piece of advice you've been given?
Gosh. I've been fortunate enough to work with some really good people, and I think it's a not a machining advice, and this is something that I have an issue dealing with all the time, which is um, to make sure you're taking care of yourself outside of the shop too. Especially, the people that are probably sitting here taking a few minutes to listen are people that are probably enjoy this trade a little bit more than everyone else who's not, right? Manufacturing professionals that just love what they're doing. Sometimes you got to remember to take a step back. It is just a job. We all have families and loved ones, and one of the things I'm probably most grateful for, and this is highlighted working in a big shop like we're at now, is the balance and stability I have in my personal life allows me to come in here and do a kick-ass job every day because I don't have a lot of the stresses that can come from outside of the shop, whether it's health or your finances or whatever. Taking some time to develop the skills that make you a good person outside of the shop will make you a better person inside of the shop. And I think pretty much every senior guy I've worked for. So that's guys like Greg Scurry at Walters or Jeff Mead or John, who I work for now. They all preach that. And when you have three really smart, successful business owners all telling you the same thing, it's like, oh, huh, maybe there's some merit to that.
Yeah, I've worked with a fair number of people, and I think if you have a terrible personal life and somehow can be a great employee, you're a little bit of a psychopath. Because like most people, it bleeds over one way or the other. Like if you have a terrible job, you're feeling it at home, and if you have a terrible home life, you are definitely feeling it at work.
That's absolutely the truth, and we have some. J&J is really unique in our structure in that we don't have. We're 140 employees across 3 shifts. So I want to say there's probably 85 or 90 day shift people, 20 or 30 night shift people, and a dozen or so weekend people. I don't think those numbers added up correctly, but I'm not so good at math.
Close enough, yeah.
Um, and there's not like a programming department and an engineering department and a quality. There is, but by and large, we have like 35 guys that are all capable of programming, setting up, and running machines. And I'm not talking can put a hole in something. I'm like that are fluent in Gibbs Cam. Um, and so we kind of really have that like part ownership, right? You get the Traveler. This is your baby now, right? You programmed it. You're setting it up. You're machining it. You're babysitting it through quality. You're going back. You're dealing with the issues. You're getting a good part, and you're making sure you have a process that works for more than just one part. Um, so we have a bunch of high level guys, which isn't always the norm. When I listened to you talk to Jamie the other week, it was, I was kind of just giggling because he is in such an awesome position to be able to kind of build your team from scratch. I'd say the bigger challenge is, come into a shop that has 30 guys who all think that they're the shit, right? And try to get all these personalities to work out the right way and all kind of uh, push the cart in the same direction. It can be really really challenging, and we circle back. We see in some of the guys when you don't have the right balance. Coming into work and doing a great job is a lot more challenging, but it can be done. It's just the road to get there is a little bit different.
Yeah, definitely. So to change gears a little bit. Both Dylan Tanner and Doug at Freza both asked. Well, Dylan said, "Are Freza tools really all they're talked up to be?" And Doug said, "What's your favorite brand of end mill?" So let's get into tooling a little bit.
Okay, so I'm certainly a Frasier fanboy, but everyone's got to take that with a grain of salt. You heard me talk about kind of developing a relationship with these guys, and they're a great team of people. But from a strictly let's just say, what does spending X amount of money on the tool bring as a value to you, who doesn't care about who Frasier is? And it's understanding that the cost of the tool is more than just the carbide you're getting, right? And there's going to be some people that are prepared to make that investment and some that aren't. And so let's clear the air on a few things. Frazier is a highly profitable company. Sorry, Doug, I love you. Frazier USA isn't just a bunch of fat cats, okay? So they have to buy all their tools, just like every other, just like Micron and NS here in the US have to buy their tools from Japan, just like just like every US subsidiary is buying their tools from the parent company in whatever country they're in. But Frazier is a financially successful company, so it's not like every cent of that tool that you're buying is just going to put food on some poor Swiss guy's table.
Right.
It's a little bit more than that, but they have a really, really robust data set, and that's been valuable to me since I started using the tools, and it is still today. And so I touched on it briefly, but basically they have a ton of machines in a lab in Switzerland dedicated to building out all the data in their tool expert. And for anybody out there that's not super interested in, feeds and speeds tools from your cutting tool manufacturer, spend 5 minutes, go to Frazier's website, click on the tool expert button on the top bar, and just roll through the tool once. Also, only select metric tools. Imperial tools suck. Stop using Imperial tools. Use metric tools. Metric tools are better. Um,
Yeah.
so,
Well,
so
and
make
I
sh-
will say too, in addition to their data sets, the fact that like the two guys you talked to, or at least for me in Arizona, it's Joel and Doug, like they worked grinding end mills. So like you start talking to them and they know intricate details, and you start asking them, oh, you can ask them applications, and they're like, oh, well, this tool is right, and this tool, and it's not just like reading out of a catalog. They're like, oh no, I remember grinding this tool, and like this is the one that you want, you know.
why one tool has this secondary relief, and why that's important in this material. Joel is Joel came from Fisher Spindles, and then went to the grind shop at Frazier. So this guy has like a high level understanding of mechanical systems, like a $100,000 spindle, all the way through like exactly how and why what tools are ground certain ways, and migrated into sales because that's a great way to take care of your family and build a robust financial future, but not because he's just some like grubby salesman. He's a wicked smart guy. Doug worked in tool and die. He was a mold maker for years, um, and then went to work in the grind shop for a while, and then worked his way up into applications. And he has a Hermla C22 20 feet from his desk. And when I started working on this part for our space customer that I mentioned, it has a 10 times deep slot that you need like a 1 millimeter end mill to cut. And I think everyone saw Doug posted on, I didn't have to share prints or anything with Doug's. I had to protect my customer's IP, but I basically said, "Hey, I have this sort of feature. It's this deep." He said, "Okay, you need this tool." I said, "Is there any way if I commit to, buying a handful of these tools, would you run a test cut for me?" And he said, "Absolutely." And so he sat down, he ran the data right out of their tool expert. He did like 200 of those slots. It exceeded the surface finish requirement that I needed. It was like six micro inch or something when we measured it, or five micro inch. I had to be an 8 or better, and that is the cost of the tool. So that's why I say don't ever just like open a Frazier catalog and order 5 tools and then be grumpy that the tools cost. So get your money's worth. Use the tool expert. Reach out to applications. Get help with your application, and keep in mind, Doug has access to Mastercam, Esprit, CamTool, Hypermill. So he has all the programming systems that you and I have. So he can also speak to, hey, this is the strategy that we think would work best. These are the parameters. If you're using Hypermill, you can actually export the tool data right out of the tool expert as an XML right into Hypermill. That same functionality is coming or has come to Mastercam and NX soon, I believe. So if you can look it up on the website, you can automatically export all that data right into your CAM system, and it just kind of closing the loop there is awesome. And that's why I'm using a ton of Frasia tools. I also Mitsubishi, and if it's titanium, if it's not Frasia, it's Mitsubishi. I probably use about a 50-50 split, I'd say. Mitsubishi has some fantastic titanium tools.
Interesting. I don't
Um,
think I've ever used their solid carbide tooling.
I hadn't either until I came to J&J, honestly, and they were using some VQ end mills, and you're like, dude, it's a 4 flute variable pitch variable helix end mill. Like, who gives a shit?
Right. How
They're
special can it
awesome.
be?
They're priced competitively. The performance is phenomenal, and every freaking part number in like that entire catalog is you blue 2 day shipping. Like, I don't think I've ever had something they're like, oh nope, we don't have that one. They
Oh,
they
wow.
stock so much of it in the US, it's incredible.
That's killer. I
Um,
guess the only solid carbide tooling I've used from them is the Moldino thread mill boring thread mills. We use a ton of those now.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I know what you're on about.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know if you know this, but I can't get enough machining done in a day, so I moonlight as a machinist as well. And I actually go down the street. One of the owner's good buddies that he grew up and went to high school with has a mold making shop 5 miles down the road. So I go down there in the evenings and run his Yazda sometimes, and they love the Modino tools. They use Frasia and Moldino stuff almost exclusively, but all the Hitachi Moldino stuff is like some of the best stuff you can get. They laser etch the tool on the back end instead of the
Yep.
shank because they're so paranoid about the tolerance on the shank of the tool.
Oh, it was so cool.
Um,
The first time I realized that, I was like trying to put one of the thread mills away, and I'm like, "Where?" I was like, "These are so expensive. How did they not tell me what tool this is?" And then I realized, like, I look, I'm like, "Oh, it's like literally on the shank. Yeah, on the end of the shank, pretty much." I was like, "That's really
yep.
cool."
Now, Doug at Frasia will tell you that Frasia figured out how to laser it on the shank instead, and it doesn't matter at all, except that if you have really tight tolerance tool holders or really good collets, you might feel the etching on Frasia. Occasionally, they go a little too deep or too shallow, and you can feel the etching a little bit as friction on the tool holder.
Yeah, I couldn't
Um,
find it on the US catalog because I was gonna put one of the Moldinos in a PG holder, and I was like, I think it's probably better than H6, and then I emailed the thing, I'm like, "Hey, is this an H6?" He's like, "Actually, it's H4 or like H5." I was like, "Okay, sorry, like, my bad."
how dare you insult us?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, they're
Uh,
great tools. So yeah, using a little bit of Zacia now, um, and some NS stuff. But yeah, Frasia and Mitsubishi are the go-tos.
okay, very cool. IGS Dan asked, "Who's more difficult to please, medical or aerospace customers?"
So we chatted a little bit about this, and ironically, so J&J has AS9100. We're also ISO. I don't know. We're the new ISO standard and the existing ISO. So there's like a million different ISO standards, but we don't do a ton of aerospace business. It's been really important to J&J for a long time to kind of diversify the business. I think they felt a little bit of pain in the 2000s. It's the only time the shop ever downsized, um, and really took a good look at the customer base. And they were serving largely the semiconductor market and primarily just a few really big customers in the semiconductor market, and decided that they were going to kind of fan out a little bit and more aggressively pursued medical work and broaden the customer range in the semiconductor side. And at some point in time, had the opportunity to take on some aero work and got the AS9100 certification. And I want to say out of the 9 or 10,000 jobs we'll run this year, maybe 50 to 100 of them will be aerospace jobs.
Oh, wow.
So it's, some pretty specific little niche parts. My understanding is that the paperwork that surrounds the aerospace stuff is more work, but when it comes to customer demands, um, I'd actually put the semiconductor is actually more challenging than medical or aerospace. Um, aerospace, they really care about, I don't know, we'll say it's a couple things here. The material certification, the part conformity, and on time delivery. So semiconductor wants all that, except that the cleaning specifications are like out of this world because basically, the success of wafer manufacturing and transistor printing, now that we're down into these like, 2, 3 nanometer processes, they're so close to what they're physically capable of doing that everything mattered way more than it ever did before. So like if a tool for manufacturing wafers had to be, XYZ clean, 10 years ago, now it's got to be like 10 times that clean and pure inside the chamber because the tiniest something can disrupt the whole process. And that's fell all the way back through the supply chain. I mean, we manufacture a part, we clean it, we send it out, it comes back, we have to check it again, and then it gets cleaned again, and then it gets cleaned again, and then it gets inspected to see how clean it's incredible how challenging it is to follow all these different cleaning specifications and processes and part handling and packaging, and it's we just got certified to the latest specification for one of our big customers, and we had to manufacture all these different coupons out of different materials, and one tool can never touch the same material that another tool touched, and they all had to be handled with gloves the entire time, and
Oh,
it
boy.
it is really really challenging.
Yeah, cleaning's an art form. Somebody shared a video of it was the cleaning processes they had to develop for the Perseverance rover, the sample tubes, because they were saying that like nothing was clean enough. Like they wanted to make sure that there was literally nothing from the Earth inside these tubes when they made it to Mars, and so they had to develop entirely new processes just to figure out like how do we eliminate Earth from the inside of these tubes so that when they get to Mars, Mars is the only thing they've ever seen.
That's a fantastic, challenge, actually. It's like, yeah, we thought we brought some amoeba back from Mars, but really it's just somebody's boogers or something, right? Like,
Right, or
how
even
do
like carbon or something. They're like, "Oh, we don't, we wanna be able to accurately measure what's in the soil that we're picking up."
yeah, we got some those coupons that we did went out to a lab, and we the report in an Excel spreadsheet, and it's like, to a material scientist, this was all just like, oh, I see exactly what's going. But you got a couple of dumb machinists sitting around this, looking at all these different levels and trace amounts of different elements, and you're just like, where the fuck did all this stuff come from? We put it in a machine, we cut it, we sent it over there. It's like, um,
That's
most of the
crazy.
medical customers, it's like, okay, machine it, passivate it, package it. J&J actually has a couple of clean rooms here. They're I always forget if the clean room, if the smaller the level, the more clean it is, or the larger level more. I think they're capable of class 10 or even cleaner, but we run them like two steps below that. So we do a little bit of packaging and stuff here. Um, we're out of space. We're maxed out. J&J was 45,000 square foot a couple of years ago. Nearly doubled it to 80. We filled up that entire space, and now we're looking at doubling the building size and bringing in a lot of these processes, anodize, cleaning, back in house to kind of sort of shorten up the delivery chain there because you know there's a lot of out of house stuff that plays a huge part in delivering customers to the part. And I mean, everybody listening's been disappointed when an anodizer fucks something up, or you shipped it out in some special packaging and it came back like just freaking banded to a pallet or something. You're just
Right.
like,
Oh,
oh
yeah.
my god.
Well, you were talking
um
about machinists bouncing around. Like, spoken to people who run anodizing shops, and they're like, they'll move around for 25 cents more an hour. He's like, "I can't keep people for more than a week sometimes." So, they don't and it's such a low cost process for such a high dollar value part that they just don't care. Like, it could be a $20,000 part. It's still $100 process to
It's
anodize it.
it's a massive, massive challenge, and this is something I'm proud to say that at least for our part, that J&J does a good job of, where, Johnny, there's a couple of high profile shops in our area. RMS is probably one of the biggest medical manufacturers in North America outside of some of the OEMs. We're talking manufacturing facilities in the hundreds of thousands of square foot. You know, we toured recently like three or 400 Citizen Swiss machines all in rows, right? They
Oh,
have one of the largest platinum manufacturing rooms in North America. I think he said there's more platinum in this building right now than like there is in the federal mint or something like that. He drew some comparison. So we occasionally get really talented guys coming over here, but Johnny will absolutely not hire you for a dollar or two more an hour, because that's so disruptive to shops in our community, where you could be the cornerstone of and maybe there's some issues and there's some stuff to work through, but, us taking you for a dollar or 2 more an hour really doesn't do anybody any good. It sets a shitty precedent, it upsets the market, and it moves a bunch of people around for not really any, great reason. And, that's something we could all get together on, right? And be a little bit more open and honest about.
yeah, that's some great forethought and, like, real big picture thinking that I think a lot of people don't do, for sure.
Yeah, it's we when my daughter, takes a toy and whacks herself and gets upset, we say, "Well, who did this to you, honey? Who did this to you?" And, as machinists, I think we gotta look at ourselves and ask those same questions sometimes. It's like, we live in this industry where we can't find good people, or we can't find good people for the right price, and it's like, well, who did this to us? And maybe not you and I, but the collectively as a whole, we did this to ourselves, right? We failed to get more involved in high school programs like we should. I'm encouraging that we do that now. Why? J&J is a pretty successful business. We need to be throwing money, time, resources at high schools in our area to try to get them more there's so much everyone could do to promote this trade, to show people that it's not some dirty dark hole. You can make six figures in five to 10 years in this trade, if you know throw everything you have at it. So yeah, that's all super important.
I completely agree. Five Axis Evangelist asked, "When's the Hermley coming?" And actually, I think that brings up an interesting point. You guys have a lot of DMG equipment. I know Easton had asked me to ask you about the DMP 70s. What has your experience been? Because the wide majority of people you talk to in this industry have a real sour taste about DMG right now because of the service. And I imagine it's a little different because you guys have so much of it. But like, what's your experience with DMG overall?
So I'm gonna try to answer this question as PC as possible. And for everyone listening, you have to understand that I'm here talking to Dylan, but I also represent J&J as a business, and we have a relationship with GMG
Yeah, don't
DMG
let me
that
get
kind
you in
of.
trouble.
But I've been here a year and a half. I knew some DMG team people from my time at Nikola, and I guess we could look at it a couple ways. So it's at the top level, it's a pretty fantastic company. When you look at the breadth of product, they're kind of leaders in almost every market sector, whether it's turning, milling, 5 axis, 3 axis, laser, ultrasonic, um, pretty much everything. They have a class leading or nearly class leading machine. The problem is that exact same thing, right? Why does Hermela make a 5 axis machine that's as reliable as a 3 axis Matsura? Well, it's because they make 9 of them in different sizes, and that is it,
Right.
right? So you can be really, really, really good at that if that's all you do. And they know that, and they're able to exploit it pretty frequently. However, if you're a shop J&J size and you're looking to really partner with someone that can provide solutions across a whole breadth of products and requirements, DMG looks pretty sweet. We get really robust Japanese turning centers like NLX and NTX. We get fantastic horizontal machines like NHX. We get pretty fucking cool 5-axis machines from everything out of Frompton, whether it's monoblock or dual block. We get some sort of mediocre but okay machines out of Sabach, like DMP and DMU 50, and it's all pretty great. But all these machines are inherently super complex, and their reliability is probably some function of their complexity. And I'd be lying if I sat here today and said, "Yep, every machine we have out on the floor is just a runner. They're all freaking great." We probably have 35 late model DMG machines, probably 45 or 50 machines overall, or close to it, and we've had our fair share of technical issues. Now, we also get pretty outstanding support for a couple of reasons. A, we're a reasonably well sized customer. We're in a market here in the Midwest where they have a really, actually, awesome support team. They have a lot of AEs here, they have a lot of service people here. Um, and we're just kind of in a good position to be partnered with someone like them, because it means we can accept some of the risk, knowing that a multi-million dollar 5-axis machine with turning and 800 million sensors and so much complexity, it might have an issue at some point in its life. Statistically speaking, it probably will, but we also have a really robust support team nearby that's going to help us work through that. So we're able to kind of leverage that. Now, that's not fair to the guy who's ready to buy his very first machine. It's a big risk for him. He's planning on making customer parts on that machine and delivering every month so that he can pay his bills. That's a different challenge. And when I look forward, bringing the Kern in here was kind of rocking the boat a little bit. DMG didn't have a pound for pound competitor. So you had the HSC 20 linear, which is a bit smaller than the Kern. And then the next thing you have is like a DMU 40 Evo, which is a good bit bigger. But basically, I was able to make a, uh, a compelling enough argument that Kern, the price that we paid for our Kern, we basically wrote off as 50% of this is the machine we're buying. That's what we think the machine is worth. But the other 50% is the fact that I have the CEO, the lead engineer, every sales guy, every AE and service technician in the US in my cell phone and in my email, right? I can reach out to any of these people at any time. I have the freaking guy who designed the machine, the CEO of the company, the parent company in Germany. Like, there is very few other places or market segments in the world where you can be this close to the people that are building your equipment. And when you're looking to grow or push the limits or boundaries, which is kind of what the Kern's doing in some respects, having that closeness is, you cannot put a price on it. Something that Kern did that was annoying for me. When it changes pallets internally, it automatically turns on the mist extractor. Makes sense. It's blowing all this air out of the chuck. It creates a ton of mist inside the machine. The extractor kicks on, it sucks all the mist out. When you change out pallets manually, it just blows all the freaking mist and makes a big oily mess. I'm like, no, I want the freaking mist extractor to come on when I press a manual pallet change button. I think it was like 6 minutes after I sent that text message that I had a certain someone remoted into my machine, and that person automatically went into the PLC ladder and added in the mist extraction to happen whenever I do an internal palette change.
That's killer.
How often do you get and so that's a pretty basic example, right? So I put some more challenging tasks to Kern that are being actively worked on, but I have the utmost confidence that they're going to deliver on them in the long term. And we're at a size that we're not looking to buy machines from people. We're looking for partners to help us do shit that we can't, don't know how, don't have the ability to yet. And that's what aligning ourselves with Kern really, really felt like. And that's why we made that decision. And um, Cullen, who asked you that question, knows that Hermla is also on my radar, because when I look at the absolute technical limits for late model 5-axis machines, I think DMG's probably got Hermela beat pretty much across the board. Whether it's a choice of spindles or what the machines are able to do, DMG's doing some pretty wild stuff. But if I want a machine that I know can run hour after hour after hour unattended reliably, or a partner whose automation experience has deep, deep, deep roots, Hermela makes a lot more sense to me than DMG does, and that's why we've been talking to them a little bit too about on the automated side, considering them as a partner. So you kind of we're always weighing all this stuff, and I'm gonna make some wrong decisions too, right? You can't you can do all the research in the world. Um, Eventually we're just going to get something wrong, but um, again, partnering with the right people, hopefully you can see some light at the end of the tunnel with that. So the Hermla's probably coming. I don't know. I'm going to have to challenge him a little bit more. I've been talking to GF lately too, because they're actually a pretty decent automation partner and have some great machines in the lineup.
Yeah,
And
having 3R under the umbrella is really, really nice.
And they'll automate with, Aroa too, which is what's important to us. Because I have a couple machines with Aroa now. They'll use, all their robots and everything, but if you wanna order a HSM 600X or a MIL P500 with an Aroa UPC chuck on it, they're happy to do that for you. So,
Oh,
I can
cool.
kinda keep all that palette parity between all the machines, um, which would be pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great.
So, yeah, yeah.
So last question I'm going to ask is from Alex Kern, Chief Bub. He said, "What's the hardest thing you've ever done?"
Okay,
And he's probably going to be mad because
I
he also asked me, "What's the best cheeseburger you've had?" Or who makes the best cheeseburger?
You know, what's funny is I thought about this question earlier when I saw it, and, um, you know, I'm an egomaniac. I like to think that I'm the smartest person in the room, which is actually a really shitty personality trait. So one of the hardest things I do, which is pretty much constantly because I get myself in this trouble, is admitting and realizing that I'm wrong, and there's people around me that are way smarter than me. Because in Mickey's bubble, I just figure everything out myself, and my way is the best way. And it makes me happy like that. But it's so funny how someone that can be completely outside of your bubble. And I have a couple of coworkers that are also really talented guys. I have over engineered something to the nth degree, and they'll walk up and be like, well, "Why don't you just do it like this?" And I'm like, "Well," I start explaining away why their reason, their idea won't work, and I'm like, God damn it. They're fucking right. That is absolutely the way to do this. So that happens pretty frequently, and it actually happens between, Alex. I probably talk to Alex and Dennis more than I talk to my wife. Sorry, Sue. Um, those 2 idiots give me good advice all the time, and I'll never admit it to their faces, but I turn around and use it pretty frequently. I'll tell them on WhatsApp why it's stupid and I'm not gonna do it that way, but then I'll turn around and actually do it that way.
Uh-huh.
Um, but yeah, it's probably just admitting you're wrong, and I'm wrong, and being prepared to, even though you've gone down this road, hang a right and go down a different path. Because the only thing you can do that's worse than going the wrong way is fucking sticking to your guns when you know it's the wrong way,
Oh, yeah,
and just keep going.
for sure. Well, I have taken up enough of your time. So that brings me to the last question I ask every guest every week, which is, what did you research this week? And it doesn't have to be machining related, though it sounds like in your case it probably is. But what's been popping up in your browser this week?
It's been pretty much 100% NX stuff. Just really, I'm in a fortunate enough position where I have the trust of management, senior leadership. We're on pretty a strong financial footing. If I say, "Hey, I really think that bringing a C to NX in is the way to go," they're going to have my back on that. That doesn't mean I'm going to feel great about spending 2, 4, 6 figures and have it be a complete piece of shit and go, "Well, I really screwed this up." So it's just kind of, you know, I've been working with one provider, but I went ahead and reached out to some other Siemens partners and just made sure I was hearing the same things and getting the same feedback and feelings. And the internet's a pretty great resource these days for sussing out just about anything. So if you opened up my computer browser, it's probably a ton of NX stuff and a carbide cutoff saw. because anybody who messes around with PG collets knows that just about every fucking tool ever manufactured sticks way too far out of a PG collet. And
Yep.
then if you get
Or
an
not
L
enough.
collet, or not enough, and if you get an L collet, you get screwed because then you can't switch your tools out as fast because you don't have that nice positive. That's great for night and weekend shift. When I say you just pull the tool out and push the new tool in and press it back together and you're great, versus it has to be sticking out exactly 730 thousandths or it's going to be, and they go to drop that tool and it just falls all the way into the L collet.
Yeah, I think we'd all love if all PG users would love to have short, medium, and long collets in every single size known to
And not
man.
have them all be like expensive or unavailable or yeah, so I've been looking at little carbide cutoff saws. We think we found one. It's kind of a niche application, but it's a wafering saw manufacturer. I forget the name of the manufacturer. I should tell you so we put it in the show notes because maybe if a bunch of people go buy these, it'll make the price cheaper. Um, but it's like for laboratories, like if you just needed to cut a very precise specimen out of something. They have tons of different blades, diamond, CBN. It's enclosed. It has some little coolant jets, and it was like $5,500, not like unreasonably expensive.
Right. Well, so I'll tell you, I just bought. There's a thing called the Tradesman grinder.
The Cutter Master,
Yes.
DC Tradesman.
So they make a machinist version that is only one-sided and has a ER32 spindle. And so you can use it for necking, you can use it for flat grinding. They also say you can use it for cutoff, and they sell a cutoff wheel attachment or just a wheel to throw on there for $200, I think. So I didn't get the cutoff one, but I did get the necking and flat making kit, whatever, and that's supposed to come in this next week. And I know, like, I posted it on the Discord maybe a year ago or 6 months ago or something, and everybody was like, "I don't know, it looks like a Chinese piece of shit," blah blah blah. And then I talked to a few people, and they were like, that had it, like CJ has one, and he was like, "No, I really like it. Like, it works great for what it is, and whatever. Like, it is what it is, and it's
Oh, that's fantastic
relatively
to
cheap."
hear. Yeah, the first time I talked to Dennis about that, he's like, "Oh, that Chinese piece of shit."
Yep.
I'm like, "Have you actually used it? Or do you know?" No. But why are you saying that? He had a different model. Because they sell some Chinese in like some decal grinder
Yeah.
clones, and I think he had something like that just sucked. But
Yeah, so
no,
I'll
that's
let everybody know how it is because
okay.
for I think it was like $1,700 shipped or $1,600 shipped with the full spindle and everything to do necks and flats. Constantine at Contrast 4D, I think it is on Instagram, also has one and really likes it. So yeah, I'll let everybody know because for the price,
Perfect.
like I don't have space for like I would love a full size surface grinder with a Spindex just to do that stuff because why not and have that extra capability. But like I don't have floor space for that, but I do have a little bit of desk space in the back that I can throw this thing on. And, I bought on Black Friday, there was like a Technics ER32 collet set for like $140. It's like, cool. So that handles, almost all the end mills I need. I can finally neck stuff. Like we had taps the other day that we ended up just like hand grinding on the belt sander. And I was like, this is so janky. I'm just going to order this thing. I'm so sick of it. So
Uh,
yeah, I'll let you know how it is because I mean, it sounds like yours is a much better solution, but it's also 5x the cost.
yeah, yeah.
So
No, hey, we you know this is a successful business, but you can walk in the building and you wonder, like, some of our stuff, our office chairs. Okay, wasn't until a year ago most of our office chairs were like missing wheels and had holes in them. But it's like, hey, every dollar we saved on those office chairs paid for one of those multi-million-dollar brand new 5 axis machines out there, and that's what's important.
there you
So
go. Yeah.
um
Well,
yeah.
I'll definitely let everybody know how it is. It's supposed to come in, like I said, next week. I think the people at Tradesman and Cutter Masters were super nice to talk to on the phone. Like they went out of their way to save me money. I thought like because they have a indexing feature where it upgrades the spindle on the ER32 to a higher precision one, and I guess has little flats that a set screw goes in for indexing, but it's not true locking indexing like a Spindex would be.
Ah,
And he was like, "So what are you doing again?" I told him, and he's like, "You don't really need this. Like, save the 300-400 bucks or whatever, and just get the base model. Like, it for what you're needing. This is exactly what you need." I was like, "All right, cool, thanks, appreciate it." So
nice.
yeah, so I'll let everybody know. Well, Mickey, thank you so much for taking all this time. You are at work on a Saturday. I feel bad for taking up so much time that you could be spending on the Kern, but I really, really appreciate it.
No worries, Dylan. It was great to talk to you. One of these days, I don't know, maybe Alex and I will get together. We're gonna flip the roles. We're gonna run with Intolerance. We're gonna interview Dylan. We want to know the backstory. We want to know all the details.
I was just texting him this week about how we got to do our three-way podcast, so that's got to happen for sure.
Perfect.
And thanks to all the Patreon members who make the show possible. It looks like Brock and Parker. Thank you guys for joining the Patreon. Again, you guys just make this show possible and let me have excellent people like Mickey on. And thanks everyone for listening. I'll be back next week.